Can Dan Mullen create another star quarterback for UNLV? What's up? This is Technically Correct with Tyler Bischoff. On today's show, UNLV has a new quarterback. How good will he be? The Golden Knights are suddenly in a tight division and playoff race, and the Raiders might be tipping their hand as to what kind of coach they want to hire. You know what one of the obvious signs that the college football calendar is stupid? Is that there's a college football playoff semifinal, well, two of them, this week. And the biggest news throughout the week is about kids in the transfer portal and where they're going to end up playing. Because the offseason happens during what should be the biggest games of the year. Obviously, there's problems with players and coaches and when they leave and the actual games, but just the news cycle tells you that it's broken because we shouldn't be talking about players changing teams when we're about to have the three biggest games of the entire season. Here we go. For UNLV, though, they got to be in the transfer portal, and they got a quarterback. Jackson Arnold is officially coming to UNLV. He is transferring in from Auburn. Here's what you need to know about Jackson Arnold. He was a five-star recruit out of high school. He has been in college football for 3 years. 2 of those he spent at Oklahoma, 1 at Auburn. He was, at one point, the starting quarterback at both places. He also got benched at both schools. Not great, but if he hadn't gotten benched, he's probably not going to UNLV. If you want to, because I find this interesting, compare to Anthony Calandria at Virginia. Just looking at sort of the normal stats, completion percentage was about the same for Calandria at Virginia as it has been for Arnold between Oklahoma and Auburn. Calandria's touchdown percentage, that's the percentage of passes that were touchdowns, it's 4.6% at Virginia. For Arnold, it's been 4.2%, so pretty similar. One big advantage for Arnold: throws fewer interceptions. Only 1.5% of Arnold's passes have been intercepted, where Calandria at Virginia, it was 3.5%. Yards per attempt is higher, almost a yard higher for Calandria, so that either means he was throwing the ball down the field more, or they just had more yards after the catch at Virginia. But for basic stats, Calandria and Arnold put up very similar numbers before coming to UNLV, right? It's not a big difference in what those two did at power conference schools before transferring in to UNLV. Now, for Arnold this past season, if you go by Pro Football Focus grade of the 16 SEC quarterbacks that were graded, he was 14th. If you go by EPA per play, it's expected points added, by the way, he was 12th. So compared to other SEC quarterbacks, Jackson Arnold was bad. He was not a good quarterback in the SEC. Compared to all of college football, he was outside the top 100 in both PFF grade and EPA per play. So comparing him to all of college football, he was bad, was not good last year. I think that's one of the big takeaways here is that Jackson Arnold has not been a good quarterback at the college level, but neither was Calandria, and Calandria had one of the best seasons that anybody's ever had at UNLV this past year. I think there's a big equalizer here for a UNLV quarterback, and the best way to sum it up is strength of schedule numbers. Jackson Arnold was bad. Auburn's strength of schedule was 13th. They played the 13th hardest schedule in college football. You want to know what UNLV's was? 125. UNLV played one of the 20 easiest schedules in college football. And to continue the comparison to Calandria, when his last year at Virginia, their strength of schedule was 36. So not quite as good as Auburn's, but still much better than what UNLV just played. We all know this. The Mountain West is a drop-down, but the new Mountain West and UNLV's non-conference schedule, they're probably going to have a strength of schedule that's like 120th again next season. And those are numbers that I think contrast it very, very well. So I don't think Jackson Arnold is going to be better than Calandria. That's largely based on Calandria being awesome. He was genuinely awesome for UNLV. But I do think it's fair to guess that Jackson Arnold can be a good Mountain West quarterback, and his numbers at Auburn are going to be a lot better just because the opponents played are going to be much worse. And honestly, I think this comes down to coaching, right? If you remember, when Calandria came to UNLV, there were a lot of Virginia fans that actually thought Calandria was going to be pretty good, just blame the coaching. Comes to UNLV, Dan Mullen creates this great season with Anthony Calandria. And I've talked about this before. Dan Mullen has a very strong history of good quarterback play when he's been a quarterback's coach, an offensive coordinator, and a head coach. At all three levels, he's done it. And he's done it at different schools, right? The big three names are Alex Smith, Tim Tebow, and Dak Prescott, right? Those are the big three names to know when he was a QB coach, when he was an OC, and when he was a head coach. But he's also had other guys. Chris Leak at Florida had at least one awesome year. There's a guy named Nick Fitzgerald at Mississippi State that had a really good year under Dan Mullen. And then obviously Anthony Calandria. So the big names, the NFL talents, is Tebow an NFL talent? He won some games, won a playoff game. So yeah, the NFL talents, obviously, but he's also done it with guys that aren't NFL talent. So what Mullen has done in his career, I think, is a valid, simple reason to just look at Jackson Arnold and say, okay, Dan Mullen will make it work. Similar in terms of production to what Calandria did, and we saw what Mullen did with Anthony Calandria. So even though Jackson Arnold doesn't really have this sparkling career, I do think you can be optimistic about it. Last thing on Jackson Arnold, because I enjoyed this very much. Ed Graney at the RJ, he wrote a story about Jackson Arnold, talked to Dan Mullen, and Dan Mullen said, I'm really excited. He was a guy last year who we paid really close attention to. When I got hired here, he was at the top of our list and ended up going to Auburn. So I love this quote because first off, Dan Mullen's kind of implying that they wanted Jackson Arnold over Anthony Calandria. He didn't say it outright, but he's kind of implying. When you say top of the list, number one, that means Calandria wasn't number one if this guy was at the top of the list. So I like that. I also love the idea of Dan Mullen and UNLV recruit Jackson Arnold last year. He goes to Auburn, right? No brainer. You're going to be the starter at Auburn or the starter at UNLV. I know where I'm going, right? But he goes to Auburn. He gets benched. He's not very good. And then he's back in the transfer portal. Did Dan Mullen say, hey, we're still here for you? We know you're not good enough in the SEC, but we're here for you. Come on down to UNLV. We tried to tell you to do this last year. We were right. Come on down. We're still here for you. I just love the idea of like, yeah, we wanted this guy last year. He went to Auburn and was terrible. We got him this time. It's a great quote from Dan Mullen to imply a couple of things from. Now, one other thing on college football, because I enjoyed this story from The Athletic this week. They put together a story trying to give us all a good idea of how much players are getting paid in college football. Obviously, the transfer portal is creating a ton of player movement, and now with revenue sharing, schools don't have to go through NIL to pay players. They can do it directly. NIL is still a part of all of this, but schools can pay players directly. So The Athletic, but none of those numbers are public. Some get reported, but those numbers aren't actually public. So we don't know for sure how much all of these different players are getting paid. But The Athletic talked to coaches, they talked to agents across the country to try to put together sort of these ranges of how much these players are getting paid. And for example, at the Power 5 level, Power 4 level, the quarterbacks are getting paid between $1 and $4 million. That's the normal range for a quarterback. Now, if you've paid attention, Brandon Sorsby, who's going to Texas Tech, is reportedly getting $5 million. Trinidad Chambliss, his agent recently said that top transfer quarterbacks can get $7 million. So obviously there's going to be guys that get more than that, but the typical range for a power conference quarterback is apparently $1 to $4 million. The next most important positions just by pay, offensive tackle, defensive end, defensive tackle, and wide receiver, all of those positions were sort of in the $500,000 as sort of the floor and $2 million as kind of the ceiling there for those positions, which is interesting because that's kind of right in line with how the NFL tends to pay positions. Quarterback gets the most, and then we see defensive ends, offensive tackles, wide receivers tend to get the next most amount of money, and then some defensive tackles will jump in there as well. The cheapest positions, again, similar to the NFL, center, guard, and linebacker. So those are mostly the cheapest positions in the NFL. This is not counting kickers and punters, obviously. The interesting one to me, though, was running backs, because the running back range was $400,000 to $900,000, and we've seen it in the NFL. That is the position that has lost so much value over the last, 10 years? Is it 20 years now? And for college football, it's still not at the top, but it's not that far away from sort of that offensive tackle wide receiver range. It's close. And so the question is, right, how much do running backs matter? In the NFL, not that much. If you watch the Raiders this year, you saw exactly why. You have to have a good line to have a good running back. So having a good running back is not that important for an NFL team. It's the most interchangeable position in the league. But in college, I think they probably matter more. And again, not enough to put them up with, a defensive end type of importance, but they matter more. And again, I think one of the best examples is Ashton Genty and what he did at the college level with Boise State. I think that's a perfect example for both the NFL and the college value of running backs. Now, if I were building a college roster and I had a budget, right? I know some of these schools look like they don't have budgets, but if I was running a college roster and I had a budget to put together, I'm still probably going really cheap on running back, right? I'm still probably like, I'd rather spend that money on another offensive lineman or a corner or something like that as opposed to running back. But I do think it has a little bit more importance. The other big part of that story from The Athletic is they focus a lot on the power conference players, but they did give us a breakdown of the group of 5 positions. And one of the examples, to use quarterback, remember the power conference pay range was about $1 million to $4 million. At the group of 5 level, it's $500,000 to $600,000. So we're talking like even at the group of 5 level, your average quarterback's getting half of what the cheapest power conference quarterback is getting. And it's exactly why Anthony Colandrea should have left UNLV, right? He ends up at Nebraska. I guess you needed some sort of promise, but if he knew that he was going to end up at a power conference school, it's a pretty easy decision where, hey, at the group of 5 level, I can kind of max out at $500,000. Even if I'm the lowest paid at the power conference level, I'm going to double that. So that gap is fairly large, and it's fairly similar on sort of a percentage basis for the rest of the positions. But that group of 5 range does not apply to all of the schools. And we know this because we just had a story a couple weeks ago where Wyoming had boosters or fans complaining that their NIL budget was less than FCS schools, right? Wyoming's NIL budget is less than what Texas Tech is paying Brendan Swordsby. Their one quarterback's making more than all Wyoming athletes. So the Athletic did have in there that a lot of group of 5 players, even starters, the floor is 5 figures, that they're going to be making $30,000 in NIL money, not anywhere close to this $100,000 that a lot of players might actually be making at the group of 5 level. So there's the disparity between the power conference and the group of 5, but there's also disparity between the group of 5 and the bottom of the group of 5 with a school like Wyoming. Now, last thing on college football, because it is the playoffs, Ole Miss takes on Miami. Trinidad Chambliss, what a superstar he is. The best matchup here is Trinidad Chambliss and Miami defensive end Ruben Bain. Bill Connolly of ESPN actually wrote a story where he was ranking the top 25 players so far in the college football playoff. Number 1 was Ruben Bain. Number 2 was Trinidad Chambliss. Ruben Bain has gotten like 25 pressures through 2 games in the college football playoff. It's insane. And Trinidad Chambliss, I didn't realize this stat. He got pressured 12 times against Georgia. Did not get sacked. Was 9 of 12 throwing the ball. That is insane. That is a wild stat. So you're going to get to see who's been the best defensive end go up against who's been the best quarterback in the playoffs in this game. Ole Miss's offensive line and Miami's defensive line were both top 5 in pressure rate this year. Ole Miss doesn't allow it. Miami creates a ton of it. And Trinidad Chambliss has a very high EPA per play when scrambling because, again, he can throw the ball. He keeps his head up and throws it, but also can make some plays with his feet. Miami, meanwhile, does not allow very much in terms of quarterback scramble. So that's probably the biggest matchup, or at least the most star-studded matchup. On the other side is very interesting because Ole Miss is the only team left without a great defense, right? If you go by EPA per play, it's Oregon 5, Indiana 4, Oregon 5, Miami 7, and then Ole Miss at 27th in defensive EPA. That's not bad, right? 27th best defense is a good defense, but it's not exactly win the national championship good. However, Miami has the worst offense of any team left. Right? Like they certainly are below Indiana, below Oregon, and below Ole Miss in any efficiency rating you look at for offense. So we're going to get sort of this star-studded strength on strength when Ole Miss has the ball. And then we're going to get, weakness is a bad word to use because it's still a good old Miami offense, still a good Ole Miss defense, but it's not, again, national championship level good. We're going to get weakness against weakness. Interesting part for Ole Miss, if you go by EPA per play through the first 9 games of the year, they were not good. They were pushing 40 in EPA per play. The last 5 games of the year, they're in the top 20. They're close. I think it's 16th or whatever it is. So they've actually been much better late in the season on defense than they were throughout the entire year. And then on Friday, we're going to get the showdown between probably the best 2 teams, Indiana and Oregon, at least that are left. Again, by EPA per play, they're 2nd and 4th in the country, and they just beat number 1 and number 3 by EPA per play. This is a rematch, and here's what's interesting to me about this rematch. Oregon lost at home to Indiana this year. Only loss of the season for Oregon. Oregon had its worst offensive game of the year by EPA per play. Worst offensive game easily this season. Indiana's defense was very, very good. However, they won the game, but Indiana's offense was not that good against Oregon. It was their 3rd worst performance of the season. So there is genuine reason to believe that Oregon can do a lot to slow down and stop Indiana's offense, right? Like that absolutely could happen in this one because both offenses struggled in that first matchup. And again, they're going against 2 of the best defenses in all of college football. So I think we might get a defensive showdown, a defensive game between these 2, which will be annoying because part of the fun of watching this, especially here in Vegas, is we're going to see Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore going head-to-head. Not technically head-to-head, but you know what I mean. Right? Like this is like, oh, the number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks in the draft play each other. We get to make as many generalizations as possible for these 2 quarterbacks in the same game. But I kind of think we're going to get a low-scoring game. Right? Like I think we're going to get something like 21-17 or something like that, where there's a few good plays, but mostly it's going to be like, oh, those quarterbacks weren't that good. We really want to draft one of these guys number 1 overall? We'll see, but that's my expectations for these playoff games. Also, important note, no show tomorrow because I'm going to Ole Miss in Miami. Driving down to Phoenix to go watch Ole Miss in the semifinal. If you're unaware, I went to Ole Miss. So will not have a show on Friday. You're getting one today, though, but will not have a show on Friday as I will be coming back from what is hopefully an Ole Miss win to put them into the national championship game. Before we get to Pitch Outs Briefs, want to mention my Patreon is up. Patreon.com/technicallycorrect with Tyler Bischoff. If you want to support the show, that is the place to do it. We're going to have extra content, bonus content there. So head to Patreon, Technically Correct with Tyler Bischoff. It'll also be in the in the description on YouTube or even on the podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening. So head to that Patreon if you want to support the show. I thought I was going to do a short show today, but apparently I'm a yapper. I can talk for a long time. I didn't think I was going to do that long on college football to start the show, but damn, it was, 18 minutes or something like that. So maybe I'm good at this. Or maybe not. Maybe you think I droned on too long. Hopefully not. So, Bischoff's brief, starting with the Raiders, because Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator of the Raiders, the Commanders want to interview him for their defensive coordinator position. The Raiders have not actually fired the staff that worked under Pete Carroll. And John Spytek, when he talked to the media earlier this week, was asked specifically about, hey, what's happening with the assistants? Even was asked, are you going to allow them to interview for other jobs? He refused to answer that question. Like, just said, no, I'm not going to answer that. So I would have to imagine they're going to let Patrick Graham go interview for the defensive coordinator position. You don't have to let them if it's a lateral move, but I'd have to imagine they will. They don't even have a head coach right now. The interesting part on Patrick Graham, he has been the defensive coordinator for the Raiders through now 3 different head coaches. He initially was here with Josh McDaniels, then Antonio Pierce, then Pete Carroll. So he has stuck around a long time. Like, you talk about consistency. This is it. This is the only guy. It's Mark Davis, and then it's Patrick Graham. That's your seniority levels for the Raiders. So probably, I'd assume he'll be gone this time around and might have an easy time landing a new defensive coordinator position. The Golden Knights are back tonight against the Columbus Blue Jackets. Here's some fun standing numbers for you. 6 teams in the Pacific Division have between 45 and 48 points. Golden Knights are leading the division at 48, but that is not a big gap between 1 and 6 in the division. There's also only one team in the Pacific with fewer wins than the Golden Knights. Vancouver has 16 wins. They're in last place. The Golden Knights have 18 and are in first place. Everyone else in the division has 18 or more wins. Those loser points are huge for the Golden Knights. 12 of them, the most in the division. So those are coming through in a big way for Vegas. Also, playing Columbus. Columbus is last in the Metro division, but they're only 4 points behind Vegas, too. So, like, the Golden Knights are leading their division, but there is not a big separation between the Golden Knights and not the bottom of the NHL, but sort of that second from the bottom tier. It's not a big gap right now. Golden Knights will probably play around 500 hockey because that's what we've seen most of the year, a little bit above, but they just had a 5-game losing streak. Any sort of 5-game stretch that's winning or losing could be significant. You win 5 in a row, you get a gap, and you should be in good shape. You lose 5 in a row, and all of a sudden, Edmonton, Anaheim, LA, San Jose start to pass you, and you start to find yourself in some rough shape. Also, I was wrong about the Olympics. The Golden Knights have more Olympians. Akira Schmid is on the Swiss team. Jesse Granger tweeted this out. I didn't realize this. He's the only the only Swiss goalie to play in the NHL in the last 6 seasons. So I guess that's an easy one for Switzerland to take Akira Schmid to the Olympics. Also, Jonas Ronbjerg is going to be on Team Denmark. Ronbjerg is with the Henderson Silver Knights, so kind of counts. He's played with the Golden Knights plenty, but kind of counts as a Golden Knight going. So you're going to have, between Golden Knights and Silver Knights, United States, Canada, obviously, Tomas Hertl with Czechia, Switzerland, and now Denmark, all with some sort of representation for this organization. So if you're going to watch the Olympics and you're going to watch Olympic hockey, you'll have a lot of Golden Knights to cheer for. But let's be real, you should be cheering for Team USA, unless you're one of these weirdos listening to me in Canada. Thank you. UNLV football. We have more transfer news, by the way, because they didn't just land Jackson Arnold. They landed an offensive lineman from Baylor in Colton Thomason. He initially was at Texas A&M, then went to Baylor, was at Baylor for the last 2 years. He only played 41 offensive snaps, according to PFF, the last 2 years at Baylor. So not much there. They also got a defensive back from Arizona State, Tony Lewis in Cuba. He played 54 defensive snaps this season for ASU, and 49 of those came in the bowl game, so only 4 through the regular season. So what you're getting in both of these players is power conference players that have basically no experience. So what are you actually going to get from them? Don't know, right? Jackson Arnold has some experience. We've seen Jackson Arnold play. There's actual numbers out there for these two. It's basically nothing. So how good will they actually be? We'll see. Also, quick side note. When I say Texas A&M, I swallow the S in Texas, and I don't know why, but I just realized I do that like a couple of weeks ago, and it annoys the hell out of me. I always say Tex A&M. Like, I don't know why, but I swallow the S, and I've heard it from other people on TV. I don't know what's going on, but we need to learn how to say Texas A&M because I have to mentally think before I do that. Couple of more things in Bischoff's briefs. Ty Simpson is going pro. He is QB3 in the NFL draft behind Mendoza and Dante Moore. At least that's what the expectation is. I thought for the first half of the college football season, Ty Simpson was the best quarterback in college football. He fell off very hard in the second half of the season for Alabama. But I thought we were 6, 7, 8 weeks in, and I was like, Ty Simpson's the best quarterback in the country. Is he a first-round pick? Probably not, but teams love their quarterbacks. Jackson Dart snuck into the first round last year. Ty Simpson does feel like a quarterback that could get taken in the first round if somebody convinces themselves of it, especially if a team trades up into the second round that wasn't able to get Mendoza or Moore at the very top of the first round. So probably not, but I don't think it's out of the question that Ty Simpson does end up as a first-round pick. I'd be curious, sort of, he makes the decision to go pro. What notes, what comments has he gotten about his draft stock? Like, have teams told him, yeah, we see you as a first-round pick, or have they just said, hey, we see you as a day 2 pick, so rounds 2 or 3? And is that enough for him to say, all right, I'm going pro, pick me in the second or third round, that's fine. I'll be happy with it. I don't know. We'll see, but I think he's going to be an interesting one to watch. Last thing in Bischoff's briefs, Tua wants a fresh start. So, story to ESPN from the Dolphins at the end of the season, I should say, for the Dolphins. He was asked if he wants a fresh start, and Tua said, that would be dope. I would be good with it. I've told you before on here, the Raiders should be open to trading for Tua, and not because they should want Tua to ever play a snap for them. It's to get draft picks. The Dolphins can't really cut Tua. The dead cap hit, if I remember, is like $90 million if they cut Tua. It's an insane number. So the only way that he can get a fresh start, the only way Miami could get out of any part of the contract is to trade him. And the dead cap hit is significantly lower if they trade him. The Raiders have the most cap space in the NFL. Now, it's important to note, they're not taking on a $90 million cap hit. It would be split between the Dolphins and the Raiders. But the Raiders have the most cap space in the NFL going into this offseason. They can absorb a big contract and get a draft pick for doing so, right? Imagine if the Raiders were able to get a second-round pick to take the Tua contract, right? He can come in and be the backup to Fernando Mendoza or whatever. I see people saying they should have Mendoza sit behind somebody. Shut up. But he can be the backup to Fernando Mendoza, and the Raiders get an asset that will help them in the future. And then Tua, you could cut him after 1 year. If everything's fine, you can keep him for a second year. Because again, we heard it from SpyTech, the goal isn't to just go out and win 10 games this upcoming season. The goal is to build this for the future so they can be good for a while. It doesn't matter if you're paying Tua a bunch of money over the next 2 years because you shouldn't be worried about spending as much money as you can in free agency. You should be worried about getting young, good players. Trading for Tua, which nets you a second round pick, helps you get one of those good young players with whoever you draft in the second round. So they should consider it. I don't know if I would actually do it, but it should absolutely be a consideration for the Raiders. That is it for Bischoff's Briefs. Coming up next, we're going to get into the Raiders because they're interviewing a bunch of coaches, and I got one special thing for you on team nicknames. The Raiders need a new head coach after firing Pete Carroll, and they have started requesting for interviews. So far, what's been reported by ESPN or NFL Network, we've talked yesterday about the Broncos ones. Vance Joseph is coming in on Thursday. Davis Webb, the quarterback's coach with the Broncos, apparently interviewed on Wednesday. Today, Chiefs offensive coordinator Matt Nagy is coming in for an interview. And then on Friday, Seahawks offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak is potentially going to interview. I know Ian Rappaport said that Clint Kubiak had a bunch of requests, and they might all be on Friday and Saturday. The Seahawks have a bye, so do the Broncos. So helps for those two that they can come in and do this. Also, I guess helps for Matt Nagy because the Chiefs didn't even make the playoffs. But 3 of those 4 names are offensive-minded. 2 OCs and 1 quarterback's coach. I like that direction. I don't know how many times I can say this. I'll probably say it on every show until they hire a coach. Kubiak would seemingly be the best, or best maybe is not the right way to put it, the most obvious offensive-minded coach to go and hire. It seems like somebody is going to hire Clint Kubiak this offseason. Doesn't mean he's the best, but it seems like he's sort of at the top of the list when it comes to offensive minds. Matt Nagy would be interesting. He'd be getting a second chance at being a head coach. He was in Chicago, and if you remember, not terrible. They went to the playoffs twice in 4 years, and his overall record was 34-31. Now, they got like sort of worse as those 4 years went on, but quarterbacks were Mitch Trubisky and then Justin Fields in the final year. The Raiders drafting first overall hope they get a quarterback that's better than Trubisky and Justin Fields. And if they do, maybe Matt Nagy can be a play caller that actually does something with a good quarterback. Again, had decent seasons with Mitch Trubisky there. So I think 12 games was the most he won in a season with Mitch Trubisky. So Matt Nagy, an interesting one from that regard. I like the idea of hiring the offensive-minded head coach, pairing it with Fernando Mendoza and saying, you guys, you got 3 years, give us a great offense. That's would be my sort of priority if I were hiring the next Raiders head coach. That would be the play. We'll see if that's how it actually works out, but that would be what I would do, and the Raiders somewhat appear to be going in that direction. Now, one of the interesting parts of this offseason is the Ravens firing John Harbaugh and what that means for the rest of the league, or at least the rest of the teams that need new head coaches. Because if you go through these openings, now the Ravens, but Falcons, Browns, Giants, Cardinals, Titans, Raiders. Ravens is clearly the best job. I mean, that's the one that you walk into day one and know you're walking into a team that has a great quarterback and has a real chance to contend. I mean, if I told you this time next year the Ravens are the 1 seed in the AFC, are we going to be that surprised? I don't think so. That's the one job that's available that you can clearly say that about. The rest of these jobs, unsurprisingly, have questions at quarterback. And so if we're sort of stacking up these jobs against each other, the Ravens is obviously the best, right? If the Ravens and the Raiders both make Clint Kubiak their number one choice, unless the Ravens just don't offer him any money, it's almost impossible to understand how Kubiak would choose the Raiders over the Ravens. That's just the reality of this. The Ravens are probably going to get whatever coach they actually want this offseason because they're clear in a way the best job. But for the rest of them, which one of those is the best job to you? Because I don't know that there's a clear answer, right? Because if you view it just from the quarterback perspective, right? Giants have Jackson Dart. He showed some promise. He's going into year 2. Do you want Jackson Dart, right? If you don't like him, then no. But the Giants could be appealing because of that. If you, as a play caller, you're like, oh, I think Jackson Dart's pretty good. That's an appealing job because they have a young quarterback there. The Falcon situation is not great. Michael Penix, Kirk Cousins is apparently going to get released. Cleveland's a disaster, right? I mean, Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders, and Dylan Gabriel, I don't know what you want. The Cardinals, what are they doing with Kyler Murray? Kyler Murray is probably better than a lot of the other teams' starting quarterbacks, but we've now seen almost a whole decade of Kyler Murray in the NFL, and it hasn't gone anywhere. So I don't know that that's appealing, and will he even be on the team? Maybe there's some intrigue with Cam Ward. The Titans were very bad, and Cam Ward was not good, but how much was his fault versus the rest of that offense? I think it's a valid reason to look at that and say, all right, that wasn't Cam Ward's fault. But do you like Cam Ward enough? I don't know. And then there's the Raiders, who have the number 1 pick in the draft. And so it's as simple as this. Do you think Fernando Mendoza is good? And I don't know if Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator of the Seahawks, or any of these other guys really know that, right? Like, I assume they're not scouting Fernando Mendoza during the season, so how can they have an opinion on that? But from a quarterback standpoint, and just a quarterback standpoint, you can argue the Raiders are the second best job behind the Ravens because they have the number 1 pick. And I probably would be a little more optimistic with Jackson Dart and the Giants than I would be with Fernando Mendoza and the Raiders, but it's close, and you can pretty much argue one way or the other and convince yourself. So just based on quarterback, Raiders are in a pretty good spot. And if they're looking for an offensive-minded coach, that could go a long way to helping them land a coach that maybe would have gone to the Giants or the Cardinals or the Titans or something else by saying, hey, number 1 pick. Who do you want? Fernando Mendoza? Sweet. He's yours. Come coach him up. Outside of quarterback, I'm curious sort of what other people and what other coaches, what do they value, right? Because these are some bad organizations, right? Like the Browns, the Titans, the Raiders. Those are like three of the worst organizations in the league. So like if you look at it and you're like, oh, the ownership part of this. Well, the Raiders aren't going to be high on anybody's ownership list. Nobody's coming to the Raiders because Mark Davis has been this great owner. But you're not going to the Browns and the Titans because they've got a good owner either. So ownership level is not good for the Raiders, but it's also not good for most of these teams, right? And, Mark Davis is firing his coaches every other year at this rate or every year at this rate. It's probably not good, but you do get the buyout, so it's not the end of the world there. The other big one that I think is against the Raiders, though, is the division. If you take the Raiders' job, and fortunately, it sounds like the Raiders understand they're going through a rebuild, so you're not going to be under pressure to win 10 games this year. But if you take the Raiders' job, how easy is it going to be to win your division? How easy is it going to be to finish second in your division? Because if things go well, 3 years from now, you and Fernando Mendoza are this hot offense in the league, you might have to win 14 games to win the division. Like 12 might not get you a division win. Whereas the Falcons or the Titans can look at their divisions with a lot more optimism, right? That the opponents are bad. Even the Giants and the Browns probably have easier paths to winning their division than the Raiders, or at least easier paths to second and a wild card spot. I think only the Cardinals are probably in the same boat as the Raiders, where you look at it and you say, all right, McVay and Shanahan are in the division. I guess McVay might retire, but McVay and Shanahan are in the division. Niners and Rams are probably going to be pretty good while they have those head coaches. Seattle's actually the team that won the division this year. How real is McDonald and Darnold? We'll see, but the Cardinals are in a pretty bad spot as well, where you look at it and you're just like, oh, there's not other bad teams. We gotta surpass 3 good teams to win this division. So I do think that would be a negative if you were looking at this from a coaching standpoint. And then there's other stuff like, is Las Vegas a positive or a negative, right? That's going to be dependent on the coach. Do you want to be in Vegas? Would you look at it and say, I'd rather be in New York? I'd rather be in Nashville? Surely we can all agree it's better than Cleveland, right? They're all better than Cleveland, right? Okay. So we'll see. In the past, we've seen Vegas rank really low on sort of the open jobs, where would you want to go? There's really been no reason to come to Las Vegas. And we saw Ben Johnson last year took the Chicago job without even taking an offer from the Raiders. But this year, the Raiders should not be the worst. In fact, outside of the Ravens, I think you can argue it's the best. With the number 1 pick, it's at least not the worst and should be pretty high on most of these lists for who has the best job opening in the NFL. Again, after the Ravens. All right, last thing on the show today. I said yesterday that the Athletics should change their name. Las Vegas Diamonds? Because their name is bad. They have the trademark issue. It's probably going to go away. It's probably not going to be a real issue. But it should be a sign. When the Trademark and Patent Office of the United States says, hey, your nickname is too vague, you should listen to that and say, oh, maybe our nickname sucks. Maybe we shouldn't be the Athletics anymore because that name's bad. So what I've done is I have compiled the worst nicknames in sports. And this was supposed to be a top 10. I managed to compile 11 because I couldn't count initially, but I don't want to leave any of them off. So we're going to start at 10 and we're going to get to number 1, the worst nickname in sports. We're actually going to start at 11. So at 11, it's the Chicago White Sox. Being named after a sock is dumb. It's dumb. It's a stupid article of clothing to be named after. The only cool thing about it is that they put an X in it. And they didn't even go with just the normal way you spell socks. They threw an X on there. The only cool thing about it. What's also worse is at number 10 is the Boston Red Sox. We've got 2 teams that did this. 2 teams are like, yeah, we're going to stick with socks. You be the white ones, we'll be the red ones, and it'll be cool from there. 2 of you decided terrible names. And then even worse, number 9 is the Cincinnati Reds. Did you know they used to be the Red Stockings? Which, guess what, is just the Red Sox with extra letters? And then they decided, we'll drop that. We're just going to be the Reds. So they're just a color? That's horrific. That's a terrible way to do this. At number, I already lost count. I think this is number 7. Number 8, the Cleveland Browns. Another color. It's a little bit better than the Reds because they actually named it after their first head coach, whose last name was Brown, which could be kind of cool, but it's a color, so it's not that cool. And their main color's orange. They don't even lean all the way into the brown part of it. It's stupid. Don't be the Browns. That's a terrible name. Then we have a huge tie for third place. We have 5 teams that all do the same exact thing. 5 of them. Huge tie for third place. These 5 teams are the New York Yankees, the New York Mets, the Philadelphia Phillies, the Houston Texans, and the Montreal Canadiens. All of those teams, their nicknames are just the names of the people from the area in which the team plays. We don't need that. You've got a city name. We don't need your nickname to be the Phillies when your city name is Philadelphia. We figured out where you're from the Philadelphia part. Houston Texans is an abomination because Houston isn't all of Texas, but their nickname is Texans? That's horrendous. Same logic applies to the Montreal Canadiens and whatever pompous crap they're trying to do up there. Yeah, try winning a Stanley Cup in color television, Montreal Canadiens. Yankees, Mets, it's all bad. All of it's bad. If your team has a city name, we don't need your nickname to tell us the same information the city name does. Terrible nickname. At number 2, the Brooklyn Nets. Now, I know there was some alliteration when it was the New Jersey Nets, but they're no longer the New Jersey Nets, and you can change your nickname. But even still, when they were the New Jersey Nets and now the Brooklyn Nets, they picked a piece of equipment to name their team after, and it was a lame-ass piece of equipment in the Nets. The only redeeming factor, right? This was number 1 on my list, but I bumped them down to number 2 because I did read this. I knew this, but I read it and I was like, yeah, that's kind of a good point. You do have the Mets and the Jets in the New York area, right? And it is a little cool to be a fan if you're a fan of those 3 teams. Well, it's probably not cool to be a fan of those 3 teams because they all suck. But it is kind of cool if you're like, oh, my teams are the Mets, the Jets, and the Nets. That seems fun. So they didn't take the worst spot because they have one redeeming quality, which leads us to number 1. And if you haven't figured it out by now, I don't know what you're doing. It's the Athletics. It's the worst name in sports, right? All those other names are at least something. It's a color, it's an article of clothing, it's a piece of equipment, it's the people, it's something. They might be stupid, but it's something. The Athletics is just a synonym for sports. I can't get over that. I cannot explain to you how stupid that is. Somebody was like, I've got a sports team. What do? We play baseball. It's a sport. What are we going to name our team? The Athletics. We're going to call our team the Sports. That is so dumb. That is unbelievably dumb. You have those friends, or you see them online, who make fun of sports fans by saying sports ball, and they intentionally talk about, like, the wrong terminology. They watch the Super Bowl and they say, oh, did he have a home run? Right? That's what it sounds like when you name the team the Athletics. That annoying friend who thinks it's cool to not like sports and wants everybody to know he doesn't like sports. Like, what are you going to name? Oh, Athletics. What are you in? I'm into athletics. That's what I like. Get over yourselves. It's a terrible name. They should change it even if they weren't moving to Las Vegas, but definitely relocating. You've got a chance to rebrand, change the nickname. Athletics is the worst nickname in major professional sports here in America. It's terrible. Change it. This has been Bischoff's Briefs. Again, no show tomorrow. I will be driving back from what hopefully is an Ole Miss win over Miami. Thank you so much for tuning in.